Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Aber.
Part 4 of the story of Shimshon, but a quick recap. We talked about Shimshon fighting with a lion and miraculously being able to kill it, not telling his parents about the entire experience, and that's going to become very important in today's class. The fact that he went to Timnah, met his future wife, talked with her, and she was very pleasing to Shimshon. He then, on his way back to Timnah, returned to the lion, wanting to thank Hashem for the incredible miracle, and sees honey in the body of the lion. And again, although he gave his parents honey to drink from the lion, he didn't tell his parents about the experience. He didn't tell them where the honey came from or how anything about the lion and how he killed it, of course. And he also marveled at the paradox of the lion being a source of food, which is something we're going to discuss in today's podcast. Shimshon's father first went down. In Pasuk 10 and 11 of Parak 14 is where the story that we're going to be continuing off from. It says that his father went down to the woman, and Shimshon made a big feast there, as the men used to do. And when the people of Timnah saw him, they saw that he had no friends. He was all on his own. He had his parents with him, but other than that, he didn't have any of his buddies that he had grown up with in Israel. He was in Timnah. He was in the land of Plishtim, all on his own. So they designated 30 companions to be with him. And from the commentators later on, it sounds like these people, or at least Shimshon, believed that they were close. They actually had a relationship and a friendship. Of course, they were going to very much violate that friendship. But at some point, Shimshon considered them to be companions of sorts. The Pikei de Rebbe Eliezer says that the Shimshon's feast and the idea of the 7 days that's mentioned in the story is actually the origin, together with Yaakov's 7 days, of Sheva Brachos. The fact that we have a wedding nowadays followed by 7 days of celebration, this comes jointly from the story of Yaakov, where he married Leah and then waited 7 days of rejoicing until he married Rachel, and also in the story of Shimshon over here, we're going to count out 7 days, and of course it's going to be very nuanced which days are what, and it's going to be quite complicated. But the idea of the number 7 being with the days, that, says Pikei de Rebbe Eliezer, is one of the sources of the idea of Sheva Brachos, of the 7 days of celebration when every person gets married. Interesting, and we're going to see again, we're going to explore this at great length. Many of the rabbis believe that the wedding of Shimshon occurred on a Wednesday, which is very interesting. The Gemara talks about weddings occurring on Wednesday, but according to most of the commentators, Rashi, the Radak, but there's many more, and we'll explore that in a bit. But the wedding happened on a Wednesday. Shimshon's father went ahead of Shimshon and Salophonis, and the Radak says he went ahead to inform Shimshon's future wife to prepare herself for the wedding. That's why he went. Now, the question is, how long was the wedding feast? From the verses, from the Pesukim themselves, it seems very clear it's 7 days. But it's not so simple. And this is what really launches a really big discussion, and it's a big argument of exactly what the breakup of the wedding was. Well, what happened when? There's lots of numbers in the different verses, and they all seem to be running in contradiction with each other. It's very difficult when you just read through the story to work out Shimshon's wedding feast, which should be really open and shut. Nowadays, we have a wedding followed by 7 days. That's very, very different than when you're trying to piece together all the pieces of what the book of Shoftim gives us. It's very hard to piece together exactly when everything occurred. Rashi, the Metzudas David, and the Radak says it was a wedding followed by 7 days of Sheva Brachos. So it's rather straightforward. How you make that work in the verses we'll discuss. But they said it was a 7-day celebration, but starting from the wedding with 7 days. The Malbim and the Abarbanel and others, and we'll explore this, say in those days it was actually very different than the way we experience wedding nowadays. The custom was that young men would actually pay for a wedding celebration for 7 days before the wedding, and then there would be the wedding, followed by another 7 days celebration, which that we're used to, which was paid for by the bride's side. So in total, there was really 14 days, a 14-day celebration, and that's what Shimshon did, and that was the custom in those days, and that's the wedding celebration was actually a 14-day, a 2-week event instead of just being a 1-week event, which is going to have a lot of ramifications in understanding the story. Let's first talk about the riddle and the events as they're said simply in the verses themselves, and then we'll start to unpack it because it's very difficult to understand what's going on without understanding the flow of the psukim, the flow of the verses. Shimshon comes to the wedding, and during the wedding celebration, at some point, and we'll discuss at what point that was, Shimshon tells the 30 guests, how about we make a challenge? We make a riddle. I'll tell you a riddle. I'll give you 7 days to work out the riddle. The prize would be 30 changes bedding and clothing, and each one of you will get one if you guys get the riddle. And if you don't, well, the odds have to be the same. You guys will give me 30 clothing and 30 beddings. And they agreed to the terms. So Shimshon told the riddle like this. He said, out of the eater came something to eat. Arguably one of the most famous riddles in Jewish history. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. That was Shimshon's riddle. Very, very vague, very difficult to work out. And so for 3 days, they tried to work out the riddle. They couldn't work it out. So again, Shimshon told them the riddle during the 7 days of the feast. For 3 days, they try to work it out. They can't work it out. On the 7th day, they come to Shimshon's new wife, and they tell Shimshon's new wife, go to your husband and try to work out the answer. You know, he gave us a riddle. There's a lot of money at stake over here. Work out what it is. And they warn Shimshon's wife, if you don't tell us the answer, if you don't manage to get this out of your brand new husband, we're going to put you and your father's household to fire. And they told her, the reason why we feel like this is fair, you invited us to this wedding and now you're going to make us poor because your husband made a riddle we can't work out. So Shimshon's wife comes to Shimshon and starts to harass him with tears and says, you hate me, you asked my people a riddle, you haven't told me the answer. And what does he say? I haven't even told my parents the answer. Why should I tell you? You're a brand new wife. So during the rest of the 7 days of the feast, she continued to harass him. You can already see there's a lot of complication because the whole feast is 7 days, and yet the rest of the 7 days of the feast, there's a lot of missing pieces we're going to have to fill in over here. And on the 7th day, he finally told her because she nagged him so much. And she told the riddle quickly to her friends and her relatives and the people of Timnah. And on the 7th day before sunset, the townspeople came to Shimshon and said, what's sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion? The answer to the riddle was Shimshon killing the lion and the honey coming from the carcass. That was the answer. So they told him, what's sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion? And he, very much unimpressed, said, had you not plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have guessed my riddle. He's basically accused them of cheating. That's the simple version of the story. That's how, when you're reading the verses, the psukim, if at surface value, how you read it. And of course, we're presented with a lot of inconsistencies with the actual verses. We have 3 days plus 7 days plus another 7 days, and then on the 7th day, very confusing about what happens when. And that's why there's 3 overarching, let's call them, opinions of how to break down the story. And I find it absolutely fascinating how each of the different groups of rabbis choose to break down the story. I'll start off with Rashi, the Metzudas David, and Radak. How do they break the story down? They break it down like this. Shimshon told the riddle right after the wedding. The wedding was on Wednesday. The Plishtim tried for 3 days to work it out. And then on Shabbos, which is the 7th day of the week, not after 7 days. With the word 7, the 7th day, doesn't mean 7 days of the wedding. Rashi and Metzudas David and the Radak say, when we say 7th day, we're talking about 7th day of the week. The 7th day of the week, which was after 3 days of trying to work it out, the Plishtim come to her and they tell her that if you don't give us the answer, we're going to burn your house and your father's house to the ground. It was a lot of threats. And for the remainder of the 7 days, not for an additional 7 days, because again, that would be very problematic. Rashi and Metzudas David and Radak say, no, there's 3 days they tried to work it out. Then on Shabbos, the 7th day of the week, they made the threat to her. And for the remainder of the 7 days, not 7 additional days, because that would make sense in the 7-day celebration, she pestered Shimshon. And finally on Wednesday, the last day of the Sheva Brachos, the last day of the 7 days of the challenge, Shimshon revealed the answer to her. She ran to the Plishtim and said, I have the answer right before the deadline. And right before the sun set, they came to Shimshon and said, we have the answer. And of course, Shimshon was wildly unimpressed, and we'll see the ramifications of that. That's one way of learning the story. There's a second way of learning the story, and this is really, really interesting. The Malbim, who bases it on the Barbanel on the name of the ephod, he says like this: Shimshon told the riddle at the beginning of the 7 pre-wedding feast. As I mentioned right before this, there are opinions that say that the feast wasn't 7 days. It was 7 days of the groom's feast before the wedding. There was the wedding followed by 7 days. So he told the riddle not after the marriage. He told the riddle to the Plishtim, all the guests that came to the wedding, in the pre-wedding celebration. Now, it's a very different timeline, with understanding that they had 2 weeks to answer the riddle, not 1 week. They had until the wedding, which was 1 week, plus another 1 week celebration. That's how long they had. They had 2 weeks to work out the answer. And on the 3rd day of the pre-wedding celebration, which is before the wedding even began, they couldn't work out the answer. After 3 days before the wedding, which is after 3 days of trying to work out the answer, the 4 days before the wedding, they didn't come to her yet. They couldn't work out the answer, but they didn't threaten Shimshon's wife yet because she wasn't yet married. Still unmarried, so why were they going to bother threatening her, according to the Malbim? So they waited. Day 4 before the wedding, day 5, day 6, day 7th day, now they get married. So it says they came to her on the 7th day, and they started threatening her. Well, that was the wedding day. Finally, they could threaten her because now she's married to Shimshon, and she could actually start to leverage her relationship to work out the answer. And for 7 days, which was the 7 days from when they were started, when the wedding actually happened until the deadline, Shimshon's new wife continued to cry and weep and challenge him. Why is he not telling her the riddle? It actually was a full 7 days, because from the point of the marriage, when she was threatened, until when the sun would go down, that's when the riddle actually applied. And Shimshon, right before the sun went down, told her the answer, assuming, we'll talk about the assumption soon. So the Malbim and the Rabbi believe it was a 2 week span, and so therefore the 3 days and the 7 days and another 7 days and another 7 days, it all lines in perfectly, because we have 14 days to deal with. So that's how they deal with the timeline. The Radak gives a second opinion of how it actually works and says that Shimshon told the riddle right away after the wedding. There was only the wedding and the 7 days after. There was no pre-wedding, according to the Radak. And as soon as she heard the riddle, before she was even threatened, she became curious. What is this fascinating riddle that Shimshon's telling all the wedding guests, and they're all trying to work it out? Remember, 3 days go by and they're still trying to work it out. So she came to her husband. She hadn't been threatened yet. She just told her husband, "What's the answer? Come on, tell me the answer." And he said, "No, I didn't even tell my parents." And now she started getting more curious. "What do you mean? Well, you're not going to tell me the answer. We're husband and wife. You need to tell me the answer." And Shimshon said, "No." So she already started to pester him for the answer far before she was threatened. Now, after 3 days of the Plishtim trying to work out the answer, they got very upset. And so they came to her to threaten her. So now, in addition to her being motivated out of curiosity, because she actually wanted genuinely to find out the riddle, and she'd already been pestering him for 3 days to get the answer, in addition to that, she was now highly motivated out of fear, realizing these people, they're gonna see this through. They're gonna punish her and punish her father for not having the answer. So the Radak solves the problem by saying that she was already curious before she was threatened. And of course, in the Radak's second version of the timeline of events, Shimshon was convinced by his wife to give the answer, and she gave them the answer right before the sun, or they gave him the answer on the 7th day, and right before the sun set, the Plishtim came to Shimshon, very excited to present the answer, which they had obviously cheated in. The Alshech and the Metzudas David, they write like this. They base it on Rashi's timeline, which says that when we say on the 7th day, what was going on? 7th day was Shabbos. So obviously Rashi's timeline, the 7th day of the week was Shabbos. Why was Shimshon not there? How were they able to go to Shimshon's wife and tell Shimshon's wife, "You better tell us, otherwise, we're going to get you and your father in so much trouble"? Shimshon's hanging around. It's a brand new wife. How did they get a chance to even be there? So according to Rashi, who says that day was Shabbos, and it wasn't the 7th day of the wedding celebrations, but it was the 7th day of the week, Shimshon, according to the Al-Sheikh and the Mitzvah, Shimshon actually left town. He didn't want to spend Shabbos in the company of the Plishtim. He was in the company of the Plishtim because this is where he now belonged, and he had a journey to see through. And as you're going to see, the story is going to get very dramatic. And Shimshon had a really important job to do. But the Shabbos he wanted to spend in not in the company of these other Plishtim in the wedding celebration. He actually left his own wedding celebration on the 7th day of the week of Shabbos, and he wasn't nearby. So the Plishtim were now able to go to his wife without Shimshon having any idea that he was nearby, and having any idea that they were manipulating and they were threatening behind his back. He had no idea. He was within his parents' house celebrating Shabbos, or celebrating Shabbos somewhere in Israel, and they had free reign to go and threaten his wife. Now the question that everyone asks is, was it a fair riddle? Shimshon asked something, an event that happened personally in his life that no one could have really known. It sounds very much, at first glance, it sounds like Shimshon was asking an unfair riddle, and it could be that you would assume that would be the case, because Shimshon was only trying to find a pretext to start a fight with a Plishtim. As you're going to see, it's going to really, really amplify. So was the actual riddle really something that they could solve through logic, or was it just a ploy or an excuse to actually start up trouble and start up chaos? And Shimshon was going to use this MO a lot. So was it a real riddle, or was it not a real riddle? That's a very interesting question. The Malbim and the Chidah say it was a real riddle. And in fact, they point to the phraseology used by Shimshon. Shimshon, when he said, if you work out the riddle, he didn't just say if you use your logic to understand. He says, umatzasem, if you find it. Now, when you're reading the verse simply, you just say, oh, if you find it means if you find the answer. But the Malbim and the Chidah say no. Shimshon was actually giving them a hint. Shimshon was saying it's a scavenger hunt. Go around the city and try to find something that represents the answer. Now, this lion was at the edge of the city, near the vineyards, on the side of the vineyards. So literally, that's how Shimshon encountered the lion in the first place. And if they would search the countryside of Timnah, they would find this incredible sight of a lion dead, torn in half, with bees literally swarming around honey inside the lion. If they went and searched, they would be able to find it. That's what he was hinting to them. It was very much a fair riddle, and he was hinting to them in the riddle itself, that this is something they could actually physically find. The Aber and the Malbim also suggests a similar idea, that there were elements of the answer that were discoverable. Again, the Rabbi and the Malbim discuss how much of it was actually discoverable through logic and how much of it was not, but there's clear indications from both of them that there are elements of the riddle that was very much discoverable, and if they would think very deeply, they could find the answer. Again, because they cheated, they had to reverse engineer that and work out, okay, assuming that we didn't cheat, how would we have worked out the answer? That's what they tried to suggest to Shimshon. Shimshon was very much unimpressed with their attempt. But the fact that they tried was a clear indication that part of the riddle was actually discoverable. It wasn't entirely just a trap and a riddle that they couldn't understand at all. So again, to go back, the threats to Shimshon's wife, it says it happened on the 7th day, in which, again, according to some people, means 7th day literally, or 7th day after the days of the week, which is Shabbos. They said to Shimshon's wife, entice your husband, that he may tell us the riddle, lest we burn you and your father's house on fire. And have you called us here to impoverish us, to make us poor? That's what they ask. Now, the word here is actually a very loaded word. I don't want to get too much into it because it's a grammatical discussion, a very, very interesting one. Haloi, which one it means? Is this so, or does it mean here, literally? But it's a big discussion on the actual phrase of it. And Rashi and the Targum, they have one way of learning, and other of the rabbis have different ways of actually translating the verse, which is very interesting. The Abarbanel, and again, a big spoiler alert for what's going to come up in upcoming podcast, but the Abarbanel actually muses just the sheer interestingness of the fact that they threatened Shimshon's wife with a ramification about being burnt, her and her father, and that's literally how both of them die. They both did get burnt by these very people. It's so interesting. Like the Abarbanel muses on the fact that they threatened her with this, but that literally ended up becoming her fate. Both her and her father were both burnt to death. The Metzudas David says the Plishtim were just so disappointed with her. They come for a wedding of joy. They come to make her happy, make her future husband happy, and now they said, "Oh, this is just a ruse. You just tricked us because you're trying to get money out of us. You're trying to inherit us, and so you invited us to a wedding feast, and this has been an inside plot the whole time where you're just going to take all our money." And so they came with this real anger, coming from a position of justification that this has been a plot the whole time. You created a ruse just to inherit us. That was like their talking point. So Shimshon's wife begs Shimshon for the answer, and Shimshon's wife wept. "You hate me, you don't love me, you gave your riddle to all my country, the children of my people, and you haven't even told me." And Shimshon's defense was, "This isn't personal. My own father and mother don't know, who I know them my entire life. I didn't tell them the answer to the riddle. Why should I tell you?" It's a kal v'chomer. It's like, if I didn't tell my parents, who I know the entire life, I didn't tell them the answer. You're a brand new wife. Why would I tell you? Why would I tell you that? Why would I tell you the answer to the riddle? And again, according to the Radak, this curiosity and this frustration that she had towards Shimshon wasn't something that was merely out of fear. She was genuinely curious about the answer to the riddle, and she was already weeping and crying and feeling so hurt far before Shimshon, far before she was even threatened. So she wept for him for 7 days during the feast, and on the 7th day he finally told her. And again, there's the Ma'am talks about the fact that he imagined that there was no risk involved. There was so little time that she didn't have to tell anyone, that he said, "Okay, I'll tell her the answer," and then she doesn't have to not tell anyone. She doesn't have to keep the secret for very long. Again, he didn't know about the threat, so she straight away went and told the answer. But in Shimshon's mind, telling her at such a late hour of the riddle presented no real threat, because there wasn't enough time for her to have a loose lip and to start telling the answer to her people, to the Philistines. So the men of the city came on the 7th day, before the sun set. A very interesting expression for the sun. The sun has many different names. One of the names of the sun is Charsan. Again, the rabbis have a big discussion of it. And they told Shimshon the answer, but the way they phrased the answer, they didn't phrase it precisely as you'd imagine a riddle. Remember, they have the answer. Shimshon told his wife about the lion and about the honey. They had all the pieces of the puzzle, and yet when they answered the question, what did they answer? They said, "What is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion?" They gave him the answer in a very strange way. They asked it in a question format, and they didn't actually spell out the details. They gave it to Shimshon in a very twisted way. And of course, the question is, what's going on? Why aren't they just saying there's a lion somewhere out there that has honey inside, and that's the answer to the riddle? Or you killed a lion and there's honey inside it now, and that's the answer to the riddle. They didn't actually present the answer in an effective way. They phrased it in a very weird. What is sweeter? That's the answer. What is sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion? And Shimshon's response to them: "Had you not plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found out the riddle." Again, very, very strange way to say you cheated. So Rashi says the sun hadn't fully set. There was still time. That's why the expression of that's mention of the sun is that literally we're talking about right before the deadline. And the Radak actually says that had they told the answer to Shimshon before the sun set, then they get the reward. But had they told it to Shimshon after the sun had set, Shimshon would have told them, "No, the deadline's over." So they actually rushed to give Shimshon the answer because they were dealing with a very, very close deadline. And again, the Mitzvah Sian talks about Chaysa being another name for the sun. The reason why, explains that Rabbi Aber now, why they phrased the answer so strangely is what's called the cheater's dilemma. They cheated. But the biggest casualty for a cheater is that they need to now make sure everything else about the story lines up, which means cheating and lying doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have to make sure that it correlates with everything else that happened. Someone lies about an event, well, they have to make sure that all the rest of the day correlates with it, and now they had a problem. If they're going to come to Shimshon and tell Shimshon, "Oh, we have the answer to your riddle," Shimshon's going to ask them, "Okay, how do you know that?" What are they going to say? We went to your wife and we threatened we're going to kill her and her father if they didn't give the answer. Well, that's not going to look very good. They want to get the prize. So they had to somehow come to Shimshon and present the argument to Shimshon that we worked it out through wisdom. Now, part of the riddle could be discovered through wisdom, although that's what they're trying to claim. And then there's part that they couldn't. An event of Shimshon killing a lion, there's no way they could know that through logic. How would they possibly know that? But the honey and the lion parts, they could say, well, we worked that out through logic. And that's literally how the Barbanel researched that. That's literally how they presented it to Shimshon. They said, we don't really know the full riddle, but we thought to ourselves, you talked about sweetness. Okay, fantastic. What's the sweetest thing we know? Honey. Okay, so what's sweeter than honey? Nothing. That must be what you're talking about. You talked about strength. Okay, well, we thought about it very deeply and we came to the conclusion the strongest thing that exists is a lion. So they came to Shimshon saying, no, we didn't cheat. We didn't ask anyone. We worked this out on our own. The answer is honey and a lion. And they didn't answer from the Eda came food because they knew the second they answered that question, Shimshon would say, well, how do you know that? And there's no, according to the Bible, there's no real way for Shimshon for them to have the answer. So Shimshon would have caught them out in their lie, and they couldn't have that. So they just said, okay, we're just answering the parts of the answer that we could actually discover through our own logic. And then Shimshon gives them back the strangest answer. He says, had you not plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found my riddle. You wouldn't have discovered my riddle. You wouldn't have been able to answer my riddle. It's a parable. And Rashi says, had you not questioned my wife, you wouldn't have found the riddle. That's the way Rashi explains, and that's, at surface value, that's what Shimshon's just saying. Simply, you cheated, and I know you cheated. I have my wife, and you went to my wife. She's the only person who knows about the answer. The fact that you have the answer is a clear indication that you cheated. But now, the other rabbis say it's a lot more insidious. It's a lot darker than just them cheating on the riddle. Shimshon was accusing them of far, far greater travesties against him, not just cheating in a monetary riddle. According to Rambam, Shimshon suspected that his wife had been unfaithful with one of them, and he was revealing to them now that he was very much aware of the fact that she had been unfaithful to him in the marriage. She had actually been unfaithful to the marriage itself with one of the men, one of the wedding guests. And he was telling them, I know about the unfaithfulness, and I'm telling you now that I know. The Rabbi Aber says, why did Shimshon phrase it this way? Shimshon was so disgusted that in addition to cheating on the answer, getting the answer out of his wife, they were now coming from this position of honesty and integrity, and they're saying, oh, we worked it out through pure logic. The Rabbi Aber said Shimshon was just so disgusted. He said, if you cheated, you cheated, but don't pretend you didn't cheat. Don't come to me and say, what is sweeter than honey? What's stronger than lion? Coming from this position like, oh, I worked it out on my own. We both know you didn't. Cut it out. The Malbim says that although that you got the answer, what's really interesting is this, Shimshon told them, had you not plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found the riddle. Again, the same language he'd used at the very beginning, according to the Malbim, that was a hint that it was a scavenger hunt, that's something that they could find. The Malbim actually told them that you worked out the answer, cheating, but you worked it out, but you still didn't find the actual lion or the honey. Because had you would come to me and say, we saw at the edge of the village, there's a lion with honey inside. Oh, the fact that you didn't find that means you didn't find the riddle. And the Malbim has a whole different approach of learning what Shimshon was actually accusing them of. And Malbim has a whole different approach of what parts of the riddle were actually solvable through logic and what were impossible to solve with that. Very interesting Malbim. But we're gonna move forward. There's a really interesting story. In Eicha Rabbah, there's a story. There was once a man from Athens, a wise man from Athens, a very elderly man who came to Yerushalayim. This is in the times of Rabbi Yochanan, so shortly after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, within 100 years or so. And he came to a school children, and Rabbi Yochanan, the teacher, wasn't there at the time. And he told he started talking to the children. And they made an agreement. They said to him, let's make an agreement. Whoever's going to ask a riddle to the other person and defeat the other person, the winner gets to take the garments of the loser. So he said to them, okay, this sounds very interesting. A bunch of kids, and he's an elderly, wise man from Athens. He was very intrigued by this challenge. And so he said yes. And he told them that you could go first. They said, no, you go first. And you're an elderly man. And then they said, he insisted that they go first. So they told him a riddle. They said the riddle was like this: 9 exit, 9 leave, and 8 come in. 2 pour and 1 drinks, and 24 are attendants. Very, very vague riddle. Again, 9 leave, 9 exit, 8 enter. This is the riddle. 2 pour, 1 drinks, and 24 are attendants. He couldn't work it out. And so they took his garments. And meanwhile, he sees the teacher, Yochanan, and he comes to Yochanan and says, what type of evil people are you? You have a visitor that comes to town, and instead of treating him with honor, you're taking his clothes away. Now, Yochanan he was an exceptionally wise man, and he said, perhaps you made a challenge, you made a riddle, and you couldn't work out the riddle. He was caught. He was trying to accuse the children of being, ruthless to him, but meanwhile, this was the riddle, this was the deal, and he had lost. So he admitted. So the teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, says, what was the riddle? So he tells them, 9 exit, 8 enter, 2 pour, 1 drinks, 24 are attendants. And so Yochanan thought about it, and he said, 9 exit is the child coming out of the womb. 8 enter, these are the 8 days of circumcision. 2 pour, these are 2 breasts. 1 drinks, this is the baby. And 24 attendants is 24 months of nursing. So this man had just got the answer to his question. So he runs back to the children and tells the children, I worked out the answer. And he tells them the answer. And then, of course, it was the right answer. But they understood that he had cheated. So they told him the very same thing that Shimshon had said. They told him, had you not plowed with our calf, with our heifer, you wouldn't have solved the riddle. They said, we're giving you back your clothes, but we know you cheated. You went to Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan gave you the answer. So it's a very cute riddle. Now, there's a deeper meaning behind the riddle, and I'm just going to mention a very, very, very brief. But there's a Medrash Rabbah that says, and I quoted it earlier on, and now explain a little bit of what's going on. The Medrash Rabbah says that when Shimshon saw the lion with the bees and the honey, Shimshon was really, really marveling at the sight. Something about the whole experience really intrigued Shimshon, and the Medrash says that Shimshon thought to himself, look at this. There's a lion, and it's an eater, and now it's become the source of food. And Shimshon marveled. He said, look at this. This is very similar to Aaron, who ate the sacrifices, showing that he had the ability to elevate sacrifices. But the Torah then declares, Zeh korban Aaron ubanov, that Aaron himself is going to become a sacrifice. And Shimshon was exceptionally puzzled by this paradox of something that has the ability to elevate, and yet it itself is going to be a sacrifice of its own, was something that Shimshon was blown away by. And again, just to touch a little bit on it, because it's a massive topic, that it's a very mystical topic, but I feel like it's important to unpack just a touch on this to show that Shimshon was understanding things so much deeper than the surface value of the story. Shimshon was marveling about the incredible revelation that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. Energy that flows into this physical world comes about from Hashem by way of angels who have the job of giving that energy, bringing that energy down. They eat Hashem's energy, and then from the leftovers of that, it comes down into this world. And then we in turn eat that energy, elevating it up. And then in turn, when Mashiach comes, we're going to re-eat that food, re-engage with that food, elevating it a third time over. That process, Shimshon saw it happen in the lion. The lion, which is usually the eater, now became a source of food. Shimshon marveled. Aaron HaKohen has that same experience in his experience of eating the food and elevating the sacrifice, but then again it's going to be elevated again by Aaron himself. Shimshon marveled at this mystical idea, and that's what Shimshon was really looking at. When he looked at the lion, and again, when he told the riddle, this is what was behind the incredible fascination that Shimshon had behind a lion and a honey, because otherwise, just on lion and honey, like why is it such a big deal with the mysticism? The Alter Rebbe explains this in Look at the Torah. The Rebbe has a Maimah, V'achaltem Achol. There's a lot of mysticism behind what Shimshon was seeing and understanding, and this was what was really going on. Shimshon had a problem now, though, because he had made a deal, and technically speaking, they had fulfilled the deal. They'd cheated, but they had given the answer to the riddle before the sun had set, and now Shimshon had a dilemma, and the dilemma was, what do I do now? They cheated. Let's actually read it read the actual pasuk itself. It says, the Spirit of Hashem came mightily upon him. Shimshon now sees that he has to do something about it, and so he went down to Ashkelon, an entirely different city. It wasn't the same city, because this is the city of Timnah. And there he found 30 men He killed them. He took their spoils and he gave the changing of clothes to the 30 guests. He said, you want your prize? Here's your prize. Killed 30 people in Ashkelon, an entirely different city, and gave the clothes to the winner. Said, you want your clothes? I promised you clothes. Here are your clothes. And the Targum actually mentions, really interesting, is that when it says a spirit of strength, it means a spirit of strength from Hashem. Shimshon was inspired by Hashem before he went on this rampage, and he killed the 30 men. This is going to be the start of an incredible amount of chaos and fear tactics that Shimshon was going to use single-handedly against one of the worst enemies in Jewish history. The Plishtim were horrific to the Jewish people. They were so evil and so dangerous, and so they were so horrible to there's no words to describe how bad it was for the Jewish people under the Plishti rule. And finally, there was one person who really knew how to contend with them, and he used series of extreme fear tactics. They could never predict what he was going to do, and that's what scared them so much. There was no way of knowing. They got into a fight by a wedding, and they cheated in the Riddle, no problem. Shimshon killed 30 people in an entirely different city. And every time they tried to deal with him, at some point they started realizing, okay, they can't contend with him, so they started pacifying him, and when they pacified him, he got even worse. This was the technique he used. And again, it's very, very important to understand this story. And I feel like the fact that the rabbis don't ask this question, and the fact that they don't answer this question, the Jewish people were at war with the Plishtim. The Plishtim were not some neighboring friendly country. The Plishtim were the oppressors of the Jewish people. They didn't hold Jewish life in any form of sanctity or specialness. They oppressed the Jewish people at that time. There was a war, and the Jewish people were not winning that war until Shimshon showed up on the scene. And now, the Gemara actually uses the story right over here that shows that Shimshon was allowed, even though he was a Nazir, and typically a Nazir, a Nazirite, is not allowed to kill people, not allowed to come in contact with dead bodies. In this case, Shimshon was a special type of Nazir. The proof is that he killed people here, and again, later on in the story as well. But if you look very carefully at the word, you see the Gemara says, perhaps Shimshon wasn't allowed to kill people. Maybe he took their clothes first and then killed them. How do you know from afar, without touching them? How do we know Shimshon actually touched the dead people? So the Gemara answers, the Gemara in Nazir, the Gemara says, it says, Vayach, and he killed them, and he struck them, Vayikach, and then he took them. It took their clothes. That's a clear indication that Shimshon, or someone that's a Nazir like Shimshon, is allowed to come in contact with a dead body. In fact, that's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara actually asks, it says, wait a second, that's not a conclusive proof, because maybe he struck them, they were still dying. He killed them in such a way that they slowly died, and while they were dying, Shimshon took their clothes off, and then they died, and so that's not a proof. Maybe Shimshon was not allowed to touch dead bodies, and in this case, he didn't actually touch a dead body. He hurt them in a way that they would die, took their clothes before they died. And so the Gemara says, okay, fine, yeah, good question. We have a tradition that Shimshon was allowed to touch dead bodies, and that's the way it is. A tradition. Now, what's interesting is, Shimshon only mentions the clothing. We don't hear anything about the bedding. But if you look at the original deal, it was 30 sets of clothing, 30 bedding. So what happened to the beddings? It's not mentioned in the verse, not mentioned in the pasuk that Shimshon never gave it to them. So Radak has two different opinions. And the Radak says that he took the money from the 30 men, and he purchased clothing and also beddings. It's not mentioned. Why is the beddings not mentioned? It's not mentioned. But of course, Shimshon, it was a condition. He wasn't happy about it. He made it very clear by killing 30 Plishtim to make sure the money was there. He didn't use his own money. He made it clear he was very, very displeased, and he made a warning to the Plishtim about what happens when they mess around with him, the chaos that he introduces. Why does it not mention the beddings? He gave the beddings. That was the deal. So he gave it, just not mentioned, because it's not mentioned. The Radak's second opinion is, he didn't give it because he felt that they cheated. He said, okay, you guys cheated. You went to my wife and threatened to kill her and kill her father, burn them alive. Okay, well, that's called cheating. I'll give you half the gifts. The other half of the gifts, I'm not giving it to you. So it's not mentioned in the verse because he never gave it to them because he felt that they were undeserving. Now, Rabbi Aber very similar says that they made an actual compromise. It wasn't that Shimshon just told them. The Rabbi Aber says Shimshon, the wedding guest, actually came to a compromise that he's only going to pay half because they cheated. And the rest of what he took, he kept for himself. That was it. And then the verse says like this. It says, Shimshon's anger was burning up, and he went up to his father's house. He just disappeared. And meanwhile, Shimshon's wife, who again, Shimshon accused of being unfaithful, was given, her father said, okay, well, Shimshon's gone. Obviously, this didn't work out. So he took Shimshon's wife, who was not divorced at all, very much still married to Shimshon, and gave Shimshon's wife to one of the friends that Shimshon believed to be his buddy, a new buddy that he met at the wedding, was Shimshon's wife is now given to this man, the same man who had been unfaithful together with Shimshon's wife. The Rambam says that Shimshon was so angry about his wife's evil character. Again, Shimshon very much understood that his wife had been unfaithful to him, and so now that he'd done the ramifications for them cheating on the Riddle, Shimshon was gone. Shimshon said, "Okay, I'm leaving," and he left. Now, Rabbi Aber says that Shimshon's wife had been unfaithful on her own, without her father's consent. Her father didn't officially sanction that. And what had actually happened, and again, a really scary and important lesson, because this man had been Shimshon's friend during the wedding, she spoke to him from time to time because he was hanging around a lot. He was Shimshon's new buddy. And from talking to him a little bit here, there, a little bit, they got more and more comfortable with each other. And at some point, she was literally unfaithful to Shimshon right after their marriage. This is what led her to be unfaithful. It wasn't even something she had planned out. He was Shimshon's friend, and so she started to interact with him. And from that, it led to such a disastrous situation. The Untold Stories says the reason Shimshon left wasn't because of unfaithfulness. He felt betrayed because of the secret. He had told her a secret. She had a few hours not to tell anyone, and within a few hours, she had went to her wedding guests, and instead of keeping the secret to her husband, she told all the wedding guests the secret, and now they came to Shimshon with the secret. He knew that she was the one that told up his secrets, and the Untold Stories says Shimshon was so hurt and so betrayed that he said, "Okay, I'm leaving." And that's it. He stormed out of Timnah and went back home to such a degree, and enough time went by that the father of the bride said, okay, let's find someone else for her to marry. The Malbim actually says really interesting. Shimshon, once he saw the riddle was given over to the people, he obviously made the instant connection. His wife had been the person that gave up the secret, and so he was very upset at his wife. But he understood, as soon as they coming for the reward, what's she going to do? She's going to say, oh, I didn't realize there was a whole reward involved. I didn't think they can actually ask for the reward. They don't want to pay the money, but to actually come, to have the chutzpah to come and get the reward from me, they're not going to do that. So when they came to their door saying, well, you owe us money, Shimshon said, oh, my wife's obviously at this point going to reveal the truth, that she had been the one to betray him. She had told them the secret, and the only reason they knew the riddle was because of her. But she didn't say anything. And now Shimshon thought to himself, well, why would she possibly not tell me the truth that she had betrayed me? Shimshon understood there must be an even bigger secret than betraying me on a riddle and me losing a fortune of money. And at that point, the Malbim says Shimshon understood that that's how he knew that she was unfaithful, because she was keeping the secret about a small thing. And he said, well, obviously there must be something bigger going on. And that's how he understood. Once he understood that's why his anger flared up at this point, and that's why he stormed out. Now, what makes the story so exciting, the way I see it, is that Shimshon disappears. According to some opinions, as we're going to mention in the upcoming podcast, a year went by, and then Shimshon decides he wants to go visit his wife. So as if nothing had ever happened in the meantime, Shimshon takes a young goat and he travels to Timnah, whether it's downwards to Timnah, but he travels to Timnah, and he comes to the front door and he knocks on his wife's father's house. And he knocks on the door. He wants to be with his wife, and the father doesn't let him in. And the father said, "I thought you hated her. I gave her off to someone else." What's amazing is that Shimshon uses this opportunity and makes one of the most famous forms of revenge against the Philistines, which is probably among the most famous parts of the story. But for the Philistines, they had no way to predict how he would react. And they were slowly starting to learn Shimshon was something really, really scary, a very scary person to contend with. And there was no predicting his behavior, at least not for them.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.